This is the second and final episode of the English Literary Era series. Now that we have a general understanding of what the final four English literary eras were from the last video, let us explore the authors who were most prominent during these eras and the themes that they integrated into their works of literature. Arguably one of the most prominent of the Romantic writers was William Wordsworth, who was born on April 7, 1770, and died on April 23, 1850. He is thought to be one of the most important figures of the Romantic era of English literature because he, with Samuel Taylor Coleridge, is credited with helping launch the era itself thanks to their lyrical ballads. It so happened that the literature of previous eras was immensely formal and archaic. William Wordsworth, as he mentions in the preface to the lyrical ballads, goes out of his way to use real language that was used by ordinary men. The main subjects of his poetry revolve around situations from the everyday life of ordinary people. He claimed that good poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful emotions recollected in tranquility, in this way going against the logical, orderly, and formal nature of the poetry that came from the previous era. William Wordsworth believed that spontaneity represented sincerity, transparency, and naturalness. He also commonly reflects imagination in his writings, allowing it to transform them into vivid and detailed works of literature. By deviating from the norm, by integrating all of these notions into his written works, he represented the rebellious nature of the Romantic period. But not all aspects of his literary work were rebellious. One of the most common themes that is found in William Wordsworth's literary works, and a lot of literary writings of his fellow Romantic writers, is nature. A good example of that is his poem I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, in which he personifies daffodils by stating that they are tossing their heads in a sprightly dance. By stating that daffodils are dancing, he imbues nature with a sense of life, energy, and inherent joy, which is a trend that is also reflected in his other works. Another theme that is very often reflected in his writings is that of the importance of memory. According to his words in the prelude to the lyrical ballads, the reason why he concentrates so much attention on the importance of memory is that he believes that it is intrinsically important to writing, for his memories from childhood, for example, were very inspirational for many of his written works. These are not the only themes that he concentrated on. A considerable amount of his works are filled with the political, social, and religious upheavals of his time also, which is very reflective of the themes and topics of other Romantic writers such as William Blake. Nonetheless, even though more than a century has passed since William Wordsworth wrote his literary works, a lot of his writings continue to be read and enjoyed even today. A man who is widely regarded as the greatest writer of the Victorian era happens to be Charles Dickens, who was born on the 7th of February 1812 and died on the 9th of June 1870. He was a British author, journalist, and social critic who was best known for his novels, which include Oliver Twist, A Christmas Carol, and Great Expectations. Charles Dickens would produce his character-driven novels at an astonishing pace, publishing them in magazines such as Bentley's Miscellany, Household Words, and All the Year Round. Through these novels, Charles Dickens attempted to outline the social ills and inequalities that he saw in his age. One of the reasons why the novels of Charles Dickens were so popular is that his characters, while having their own unique quirks and traits, also had a sense of authenticity to them, making the reader more prone to connect and relate to them. One of the themes that revolves around his characters is the hardship and suffering of children. That can be seen through characters such as Pip and Oliver Twist, who experience great tragedies and difficulties at a young age. Another theme that is reflected through many of his writings is the suffering of the poor, good examples of which are Little Dorrit, whose family is imprisoned due to debt, and Joe, a poor sweeper who is neglected by his society, which is fully indifferent to him and his troubles. Through all of these characters and their stories, Charles Dickens attempted to arouse humanity in his fellow compatriots, ultimately hoping that his work was going to encourage people to enact social reform. The fact is, he wasn't alone in addressing the injustices and hardships that people had to face. Many other writers of the Victorian era, like Elizabeth Gaskell and George Eliot, also went out of their way to point out and critique the state of affairs in their country. One of the most prominent modernist writers was James Joyce, who was born on February 2nd, 1882 and died on January 13th, 1941. James Joyce was a novelist, poet, and literary critic who was very influential on the modernist literary community of his time. His writing consistently reflected and referenced his childhood in Dublin, where he was born. He was greatly influenced by his schoolmates, roommates, acquaintances, and family members regarding his written work. James Joyce would experiment with different forms of story structures, a good example of which is his tendency to concentrate on the human psyche, which was revealed through hidden motivations. A good example of a work that integrates this type of experimentation is James Joyce's novel Ulysses, which combines within it a plethora of different literary genres and styles of writing, exploring such themes as the nature of time and memories, as well as the theme of identity. This amalgamatory creation of James Joyce greatly affected the novels of the 20th and 21st centuries, by pushing them away even further from the status quo that has been established over the past centuries of writing. His experimentation didn't end there though, for he then proceeded to write another novel called Finnegan's Wake, in which he experimented greatly with the subject, language, structure, and meaning. In this novel, he explored such abstract themes as unconsciousness, life, and universal human experience. Said experimentation granted him renown among important intellectuals and artists. His tendency to experiment and his exploration of abstract and complex themes were reflected by many other modernist writers such as Virginia Woolf and Ezra Pound. Salman Rushdie happens to be one of the most prominent postmodern writers. He was born on June 19, 1947, and is still alive today. Salman Rushdie's postmodern writing revolves around authoritarianism and exhibits a considerable degree of alienation. He also comments on controversial political, religious, and cultural issues through his writing. One such written work is his novel The Satanic Verses, in which he portrays Muhammad and the Muslim faith in a negative light, by having Muhammad be guided by the devil to worship pagan goddesses, which goes against the tenets of the Muslim faith. In reaction to this novel, a multitude of violent protests were enacted by the Muslim population, and Salman Rushdie's book was censored in India, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and other Arab states. There were several riots that broke out because of this book, which caused injuries and even some deaths. This book also caused Ayatollah Khomeini, the former supreme leader of Iran, to call for Salman Rushdie to be killed, which caused him to go into hiding. So, when it comes to Salman Rushdie's writings, they genuinely are controversial and provoking to a lot of people. The themes that are most common in his writings are quite complex and abstract, being reminiscent of the modernist writings, which also explored complex and abstract themes. Some of these themes include the nature of truth and reality, the interplay of sacred and profane, and the blurring of boundaries between reality and fantasy. So, when it comes to the authors representing postmodernism, they are basically just like modernists, except they delve into deeper, more convoluted, and experimental recesses of the themes and topics that the modernists have already gone through and explored, which Salman Rushdie is a very good example of. Today we have gone through some of the most prominent authors of the Romantic, Victorian, Modernist, and Postmodernist eras. We have also explored the different themes that they illuminated through their writings and how they are reflective of these literary movements in general. Hopefully, you have learned something new thanks to this short video series, and now have a better understanding of the English literary movements. Finally, I would like to thank you for taking the time to watch the video to the end. I would also like to say a big thank you to the authors of the book that I used extensively to research the different eras, authors and themes of the English literary eras, that being British literature to Romantic era to the 20th century and beyond. Again, thank you for watching this video. Have a good day. Goodbye.